The Nile River flows calmly under the scorching Egyptian sun. But in the humble dwellings of the Hebrews, terror has replaced all peace. A royal decree has been proclaimed. All newborn Hebrew male children must be thrown into the river. The Pharaoh, whose name history has not preserved with certainty, but whom scholars possibly place as Ramses II, fears the growth of this enslaved people. The Hebrews, descendants of the ancient Israelites who arrived in Egypt centuries ago during the time of Joseph, have multiplied. And fear of numbers is fear of power. In a modest home, a woman named Jochebed gazes at her newborn son. 3 months have passed since his birth, 3 months of hiding him, stifling his cries, living in constant panic. But the baby grows, and with him, the impossibility of hiding him grows. The decision this mother is about to make defies logic. To save her son from drowning, she will place him directly in the water. Jochebed's hands weave reeds with precision. Each papyrus fiber is woven with both desperation and hope. She seals the seams with pitch and asphalt to make it waterproof. It's not an ordinary basket. It's a miniature ark, a vehicle for survival. Inside, she places her son, wrapped in simple cloths. The baby's eyes, still unable to comprehend the world, gaze toward the sky. Miriam, his older sister, watches from a distance. She has precise orders. Follow the basket, see where it ends up, protect her brother even from the shadows. The Nile's current gently carries the basket among the reeds on the bank. Fate, or providence, guides it toward an area where royal women often bathe. The Pharaoh's daughter's feet touch the waters of the Nile. The maids surround her, preparing ointments and oils. Then, among the papyrus scrolls, one of the servants spots the basket. Curiosity overcomes protocol. When they open the small chest, a Hebrew baby cries before the eyes of the Egyptian princess. The moment is impossible. The daughter of the very man who ordered these children killed now holds one of them in her arms. But something stirs in her heart. Perhaps it's the child's vulnerability. Perhaps it's rebellion against his father. Perhaps it's simple human compassion. The princess decides, this child will live. And not only will he live, he will be her son. Miriam, watching shrewdly from the reeds, approaches. In a trembling but calculated voice, she asks if the princess needs a Hebrew wet nurse to breastfeed the child. The answer is yes. Minutes later, Jochebed is hired to feed her own son, now under the protection of the royal palace. The irony is perfect. The system that wanted to kill him now pays to keep him alive. The years pass. The boy, whom the princess names Moses, which in Egyptian means drawn from the water, grows up among limestone columns and golden hieroglyphs. He receives an Egyptian education. He learns to read and write in the complex script of the pharaohs, studies mathematics, astronomy, perhaps even military strategy. He wears fine linen, walks through halls of power, and is treated like a prince. But Jochebed, during the early years when she breastfed him, whispered truths that palace walls cannot erase. You are Hebrew. Your people suffer. You are one of them. This seed of identity remains dormant in his consciousness, waiting for the moment to sprout. Moses, now a young man, walks through the construction sites that beautify the Egyptian empire. Brick by brick, it is Hebrew hands that build the grandeur of Egypt. He observes their gaunt faces, their backs bent under the weight, the lashes of the foreman. Something breaks inside him. Perhaps it's the memory of his biological mother's words. Perhaps it's the impossibility of continuing to ignore the injustice. One day, he sees an Egyptian overseer brutally beating a Hebrew slave. The scene is commonplace in Egypt, but not for Moses at this moment. He looks around. There are no witnesses. Impulse is faster than thought. Moses kills the Egyptian. He buries the body in the sand. The prince in the palace has just crossed an irreversible line. He has chosen a side, though he doesn't yet fully understand it. The next day, Moses returned to his work. 2 Hebrews were arguing violently. He tried to separate them, to mediate, to make peace. But one of them confronted him. Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Horror grips him. The secret is no longer a secret. If the Hebrews know, Pharaoh will soon know. And royal adoption will not protect him from punishment for murdering an Egyptian. Moses, the prince of Egypt, flees. He abandons the palaces, the fine robes, the security, the power. He crosses the Sinai desert as a fugitive, with no clear destination, only the certainty that his former life is over. The man meant to bridge two worlds ends up rejected by both. Too Hebrew for Egypt, too Egyptian for the Hebrews. On the horizon, the endless dunes await him. And on those dunes, an encounter that will transform not only his destiny, but the course of human history. What will Moses find in the desert that will transform him from a fugitive into a liberator of nations? The land of Midian stretches out, barren and desolate. Moses, the former prince, sits wearily by a well. He no longer wears jewels or Egyptian linen, only the dust of the road and the uncertainty of the uprooted. When the daughters of the priest Jethro arrive to water their flocks, some local shepherds try to drive them away. Moses intervenes. Perhaps it's an echo of what he did in Egypt, or perhaps it's simply who he truly is, someone who cannot tolerate injustice. Jethro, grateful for Moses' defense of his daughters, invites him to his home. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. The fugitive becomes a shepherd. He marries Zipporah, one of Jethro's daughters. They have a son, whom he names Gershom, meaning foreigner there, a name that screams his perpetual status as an outsider. 40 years pass. Moses grows old tending sheep that are not his, in a land that is not his own, far from the people to whom he never truly belonged. Life has reduced him to an anonymous shepherd, or so he believes. One day, while leading the flock through the desert, Moses arrives at Mount Horeb, also called Sinai. The mountain rises imposingly, rocky, far removed from all civilization. The silence is absolute, broken only by the wind and the occasional bleating of sheep. Then, something impossible captures his attention. A common bramble bush, one of those that grows among the rocks, is ablaze. But the fire does not consume it. The branches remain intact, green, alive, while the fire dances around them without destroying them. Known physics has been suspended. Moses, torn between fear and fascination, approaches. He needs to understand what his eyes see, but his mind cannot process. Moses, Moses, the voice rises from the fire, clear and authoritative. He responds, almost instinctively, "Here I am." The voice commands him to stop, to remove his sandals, for the ground he stands on is sacred. Moses obeys, trembling. It is not a dream. It is not a desert hallucination. Something, or someone, is speaking to him. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hides his face, terrified to look. The voice continues, "I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them." Moses' heart pounded. Egypt. The people. The slavery he had left behind 4 decades earlier. He thought he had closed that chapter. But the voice hadn't finished. "I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses' response is not one of jubilation or heroic acceptance. It is one of pure panic. Who am I to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? It is a legitimate question. He is an 80-year-old shepherd, a fugitive, a man without an army, without power, without credentials. How can he stand before the most powerful man in the known world and demand the release of his workforce? God responds with a promise, "I will be with you." But Moses needs more. What should I tell them when they ask me your name? The answer he receives is enigmatic and profound. "I am who I am." A name that is more than a name. It is pure existence, absolute being, eternal presence. Moses must tell them that "I am" has sent him. Moses continues to resist. What if they don't believe me? What if they say you never appeared? God shows him miraculous signs. He commands him to throw his shepherd's staff to the ground. The wood transforms into a snake. Moses backs away, frightened. God tells him to take it by the tail. When he obeys, it turns back into a staff. Second sign, Moses puts his hand inside his chest and pulls it out leprous, as white as snow. He puts it back in and it comes out healed. Third sign, water from the Nile that, when poured onto the ground, turns into blood. 3 demonstrations that the power behind his mission is real, verifiable, undeniable. Even with miraculous signs, Moses attempts one last excuse. "Lord, I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech." Some scholars interpret this as stuttering, others as simply a lack of eloquence. God grows impatient. Who gave human beings their mouths? Go, and I will help you speak." Finally, God grants that Aaron, Moses' biological brother who remained in Egypt, will be his spokesman. Moses accepts. The conversation by the burning bush ends. The shepherd takes his staff, now much more than a simple stick, and returns to Jethro. He asks permission to return to Egypt. Jethro blesses him. On the return journey, accompanied by Zipporah and his sons, Moses encounters Aaron, who has been sent into the desert by divine instruction. The brothers embrace. For decades of separation are over. Together, they journey toward Egypt, toward the enslaved people, toward the palace of absolute power. The fugitive returns, but he is no longer the same man. He carries a message, a mission, and a power that comes neither from armies nor gold. The question hangs in the desert air. Will it be enough to break the chains of an ancient empire? How will the most powerful pharaoh on earth react when an elderly shepherd demands that he free millions of slaves? The Hebrew huts in Goshen smell of sweat, bricks, and resignation. Moses and Aaron summon the elders of the people. Their faces are weathered by generations of slavery, their eyes having witnessed hope die. Aaron speaks, relaying the words of Moses, who in turn delivers the divine message. God has seen them, has heard them, and is coming to set them free. The initial skepticism is palpable, but then Moses performs the signs. The staff becomes a snake, the sick hand is healed, the water turns to blood. A murmur ripples through the assembly. Something impossible is happening. The elders prostrate themselves. For the first time in centuries, the Hebrew people feel something akin to hope. But the true test has yet to begin. The royal palace is pure magnificence. Columns with lotus capitals, walls covered in gold, and a polished stone floor that reflects the light. The pharaoh sits on his throne, draped in the royal Neem's headdress, holding the scepter and flail, symbols of absolute authority. He is considered divine by his people, the intermediary between the gods and mortals. Moses and Aaron appear before him. There are no servile bows, none of the expected protocol. Aaron pronounces the words, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." The request is absurd from the perspective of power, an unknown God demanding that Pharaoh release his workforce. The response was exactly as expected. "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." For Pharaoh, the gods of slaves had no authority over the gods of Egypt. The request was denied with disdain. But the Pharaoh did not stop at the refusal. Furious at the audacity of these men, he retaliated. He ordered the taskmasters to make the work harder. The Hebrews would no longer receive straw to make bricks. They would have to gather it themselves, but the production quota would remain the same. It was an impossible equation designed to break them. The Hebrew overseers are beaten when their quotas aren't met. In despair, they complain to Pharaoh. He scorns them. "You are lazy. That's why you shout. Let's go and offer sacrifices to our God." The overseers leave humiliated and find Moses and Aaron waiting for them. Their anger erupts. "May the Lord judge you, for you have made us odious in Pharaoh's eyes. You have put a sword in your hand to kill us." Moses faces his worst leadership crisis. The people he was supposed to liberate are now suffering even more because of him. He turns to God with a bitter complaint. "Why have you mistreated this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has mistreated this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." The divine response is not one of justification, but of reaffirmation. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. By a mighty hand he will let them go, and by a mighty hand he will drive them out of his land." God reminds Moses of the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promise of liberation and land remains in effect. What follows will not be diplomatic negotiation, but a demonstration of power. Moses delivers this message to the people. But the Hebrews, crushed by increased labor and beatings, do not listen. The hope briefly ignited by the signs has been extinguished under the weight of reprisals. Moses finds himself leading a people who do not want to follow him, facing a ruler who does not respect him, bearing a message that no one believes. Moses and Aaron return to the palace. This time, Pharaoh demands a sign to prove his authority. Aaron throws his staff to the ground, and it turns into a snake. But Pharaoh summons his magicians, the wise men of Egypt. These men, using what biblical sources call incantations, also throw their staffs, which transform into snakes. For a moment, it seems that Moses' power is merely common magic tricks. But then something distinctive happens. Aaron's serpent devours the magician's serpents. It is a symbolic demonstration. The power behind Moses is superior, all-consuming, ultimate. Yet Pharaoh hardens his heart. He will not free the people. The first plague begins at dawn. Pharaoh goes out to the Nile for his morning rituals. The Nile is not just a river for Egypt. It is life. It is a god. It is the beating heart of civilization. Moses awaits him there. Without further ado, he instructs Aaron to strike the waters with his staff. The Nile is transformed. The clear water turns red, thick, and unbreathable. Fish die en masse, their bodies floating and creating an unbearable stench. The sacred river becomes unusable. The Egyptians dig desperately in search of drinking water. For 7 days, Egypt suffers thirst and aquatic death. The Pharaoh's magicians replicate the miracle with water in vessels, seemingly giving the Pharaoh justification for not yielding. But a question hangs over Egypt. If this is only the beginning, what more can the god of slaves do to the most powerful empire in the world? The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, is now a river of death. But this is only the first of 10 demonstrations of power. How much suffering will the Pharaoh have to witness before he breaks? 7 days after the plague of blood, Moses returned to Pharaoh with the same message: "Let my people go." The refusal was immediate. Aaron stretched out his staff over the rivers, canals, and ponds of Egypt. What emerged was an amphibious nightmare. Frogs by the millions invaded the land. They're not just annoying, they're everywhere. They get into houses, beds, ovens, and food containers. The sound of their croaking is deafening day and night. Egypt becomes a hive of hopping creatures. Even the Pharaoh's magicians manage to produce more frogs, absurdly worsening the situation. Finally, Pharaoh relents, partially. He summons Moses. "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let the people go." Moses prays. The next day, the frogs die simultaneously. The stench of millions of rotting frog carcasses fills Egypt. They pile them up in heaps. But when Pharaoh sees that there is relief, he hardens his heart again. The promised deliverance evaporates like the waters of the Nile. Without further warning, Aaron strikes the dust of the earth with his staff. The fine dust of the Egyptian soil transforms into tiny lice or midges. The translation from Hebrew is uncertain, that infest humans and animals. Every particle of dust becomes an insect. It is an unavoidable plague. They are in the hair, in the clothes, on the skin, causing constant itching and endless irritation. Pharaoh's magicians attempt to replicate this miracle. They fail. It is the first time they have been unable to match Moses' power. They admit to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." It is a significant acknowledgement. Even practitioners of Egyptian magic recognize that a higher power is at work. But Pharaoh does not listen to his own advisors. His heart remains unmoved. The fourth plague marks a strategic shift. God tells Moses, "This time I will make a distinction between my people and your people." The 3 previous plagues affected everyone in Egypt, including the Hebrews. Now, the separation begins. Swarms of flies, some translate as horseflies or various insects, invade Egypt. They fill the houses, cover the ground, and make normal life impossible. But in Goshen, where the Hebrews live, there isn't a single insect. The boundary is clear, undeniable, miraculous. It's not a natural disaster. It's selective judgment. Pharaoh negotiates again. "Go, offer sacrifices to your God within the land." It's an empty concession, allowing them to worship, but without letting them escape his control. Moses rejects the offer. "It's not right to do it this way, because we would be offering to our God what is an abomination to the Egyptians. They need to go to the desert." Pharaoh pretends to relent. "I'll let you go, just don't go too far." Moses prays, the swarms disappear. And again, Pharaoh backs down. The pattern becomes predictable, but no less devastating. The 5th plague strikes Egypt's economy and livelihood. A deadly pestilence descends upon all Egyptian livestock. Horses, donkeys, camels, cows, sheep. All the Egyptians' animals die en masse. The loss is catastrophic. No pack animals, no livestock for food, no beasts of burden for transport. But all the livestock of the Israelites survives unharmed. The separation becomes more dramatic, more impossible to ignore. Pharaoh sends inspectors to verify. They confirm that not a single Hebrew animal has died. The evidence is irrefutable. The logical conclusion is obvious. Yet Pharaoh hardens his heart once again. Moses takes handfuls of ash from a furnace and throws them into the air before Pharaoh. The ash is scattered over Egypt like fine dust. Wherever it touches human or animal skin, painful ulcers break out, festering sores that cause agony. Even Pharaoh's magicians are so severely affected that they cannot appear before Moses. Their silence speaks volumes. They have been completely overwhelmed. Egypt now suffers not only inconveniences or economic losses, but direct, constant, humiliating physical pain. And yet, the text records that Pharaoh did not listen. The seventh plague is preceded by the most severe warning yet. Moses tells Pharaoh, "Send to safety your livestock and everything you have in the field, because every man or animal found in the field that is not brought into the house will die when the hail falls on them." Some of Pharaoh's servants, terrified by the previous plagues, took the warning seriously and sheltered their servants and livestock. Others, defiant or incredulous, left them in the fields. Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky. What descended was not an ordinary storm. It was hail mixed with fire, an impossible meteorological phenomenon. Ice and fire falling simultaneously. The hail destroys everything in its path: crops, trees, people, animals. It is the most physically destructive plague to date. Only the land of Goshen remains untouched. Not a single hailstone falls there. Pharaoh, seeing the devastation, urgently summons Moses. "I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked." He promises to let them go. Moses prays, and the storm subsides. And in the now familiar and exasperating pattern, Pharaoh backs down again as soon as the danger has passed. But something has changed. Even Pharaoh's servants begin to question his obstinacy. Some murmur, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so they can serve their God." Don't you realize that Egypt is ruined? Egypt crumbles plague after plague, but the Pharaoh continues to refuse. 3 more plagues are yet to come, and the final one will be so devastating that it will change Egypt forever. What will it take to break the will of the most powerful ruler in the world? The 8th plague begins with a stark warning. Moses tells Pharaoh that locusts will cover Egypt and devour everything the hail left untouched. Pharaoh's terrified servants plead with him, "Let these men go. Don't you know Egypt is ruined?" Pharaoh, pressured by his own court, summons Moses. He negotiates. The men can go, but the women and children must stay behind. Moses rejects the offer. It's an obvious trap. Without families, the men will have to return. Furious, Pharaoh banishes them from his presence. Moses extends his staff. An east wind blows throughout that day and all night. At dawn, the wind brings locusts in numbers beyond human experience. They literally cover the ground until the earth is no longer visible. They devour every green shoot, every leaf, every fruit that survived the hail. The trees are left bare. The fields, completely desolate. Nothing green remains in all the land of Egypt. Famine is now a terrifying certainty. Pharaoh hastily summoned Moses and Aaron. "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Forgive my sin just this once, and beg the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me." Moses interceded. An extraordinarily strong west wind swept all the locusts into the Red Sea. Not a single one remained. And again, when the danger had passed, Pharaoh's heart hardened. Without warning, Moses stretches his hand toward the sky. Dense darkness, so thick that, according to the text, it can be felt, covers the entire land of Egypt. It is not simply the absence of sunlight. It is a supernatural, oppressive darkness that prevents movement. For 3 days, the Egyptians remain motionless where they stood when the darkness fell. They cannot see their neighbors. They cannot rise from their places. But in the homes of the children of Israel, there is light. The division between the two peoples becomes absolute. Light versus darkness, freedom of movement versus forced paralysis. It is a perfect visual metaphor for the conflict. Egypt sinks into darkness while the enslaved people dwell in light. After 3 endless days of darkness, Pharaoh summoned Moses with a new proposal. Go, serve the Lord. Only leave your flocks and herds. Even your children may go with you. It was the most generous concession yet. But Moses knew that without livestock for sacrifices there was no complete worship. He rejected the offer. You yourself will also provide us with sacrifices and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock will go with us. Pharaoh erupts in final fury. Leave my presence. Beware of ever seeing my face again. For the day you see my face you will die. Moses replies with icy calm. You have spoken well. I will never see your face again. The dialogue is over. The negotiations are concluded. What comes now will not be persuasion, but final judgment. Before leaving the palace, Moses utters the most devastating prophecy of all. His voice echoes through the corridors of power. Thus says the Lord, at midnight I will pass through the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn son in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. The threat is universal. From the royal palace to the humblest house, no Egyptian home will be spared. And there will be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been before, nor ever will be again. Moses concludes with a prediction. Pharaoh's servants will come and bow down before him, begging him to let him go with his people. Then he leaves Pharaoh's presence, burning with anger. As Egypt unwittingly prepares for tragedy, Moses summons the Hebrew people with precise instructions. Each family must select a yearling lamb without blemish. On the 10th day of the month of Abib, later to be renamed Nisan, they must set it apart. They must observe it for 4 days. At sunset on the 14th day, they must sacrifice the lamb. But not just any old way. They must take its blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of their houses. The blood will be a sign, a mark of protection. That night they must eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. They must eat it fully clothed, with their sandals on and their staff in hand, like people ready to depart. Moses explains the meaning. For the Lord will pass through to strike down the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over that door and will not allow the destroyer to enter their houses to strike them down. The word used in the Hebrew text is pasach, which means to pass over. This is the origin of the name of this night, Passover. The 14th day of the month arrives. The Hebrew families obey meticulously. They sacrifice the lambs. They paint the door frames with blood. They roast the meat. They eat hurriedly, dressed for the journey. The children ask the meaning of these strange acts. The parents explain, tonight God will deliver us. In Egyptian homes, life unfolds with tension but without specific preparation. The previous plagues have passed. This threat will also pass, or so they believe. Night falls over the Nile. The stars shine indifferently on the human drama. The hours tick by, and then, at the stroke of midnight, something invisible yet devastating sweeps through Egypt. In the royal palace, the Pharaoh's firstborn, the heir to the throne, the prince destined to be God-king, stops breathing. In the homes of the nobles, firstborn sons die in their beds. In the prisons, the firstborn of captives perish. In the stables, the firstborn of livestock falls. There is no Egyptian home without death. The promise is fulfilled with surgical precision and utter horror. The cry begins in the palace and spreads like a shockwave throughout Egypt. It is the sound of mothers discovering dead children, fathers finding lifeless heirs, entire families plunged into simultaneous grief. The biblical text records, there was not a house where someone was not dead. The lament is deafening, universal, heartbreaking. Pharaoh gets up in the middle of the night. His son is dead. His servants have lost their children. His entire nation is in mourning. He urgently summons Moses and Aaron in the pitch darkness. Get up, leave my people, both you and the Israelites. Go, serve the Lord, as you have said. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go. And bless me also. There are no conditions, no negotiations, no promises to break later. It is total, immediate, desperate surrender. The Egyptians, terrified that they will all die if the Hebrews stay any longer, urge the Israelites to leave at once. They give them silver, gold, clothing, anything to hasten their departure. The people who enslave them now enrich them just to see them go. In the early morning hours following Egypt's darkest night, approximately 600,000 men on foot, not counting women and children, suggesting a total multitude of over 2 million, began to leave Goshen. They carried their flocks, their livestock, their hurried possessions. They carried unleavened dough, for there had been no time for it to rise, which they would later bake into unleavened cakes. They are also joined by many mixed people, Egyptians who, impressed by the plagues and the power of the Hebrew God, decide to join the Exodus. It is a massive population movement, chaotic, excited, fearful, and hopeful all at once. They walk eastward, toward the desert, toward freedom, led by Moses, who carries with him the bones of Joseph, fulfilling the ancient promise that they would be led back to the promised land. Egypt, behind them, remains in mourning. The most powerful empire in the known world has been broken not by armies, but by plagues, not by swords, but by punished obstinacy. The Pharaoh who believed himself a god has learned painfully that there is a higher God. But the story is not yet over. For wounded pride and forced repentance rarely last long after the immediate pain subsides. 2 million people march into the desert carrying the wealth of Egypt. But behind them, the Pharaoh will soon wonder, what have we done by letting our workforce go? And when regret overwhelms him, he will assemble the most powerful army on earth for a pursuit that will end in the most spectacular miracle of ancient history. God did not lead the Israelites along the shortest route to Canaan, which would have been the Mediterranean coast. That route was fortified with Philistine military garrisons. A newly liberated people, without military training, would easily be demoralized in battle. Moreover, there was a deeper strategic reason. God wanted to lead them to a place where only a miracle could save them, so that their faith would be forged in the face of overwhelming impossibility. He guides them southeast, into the desert, toward the Red Sea, or more precisely, according to scholars, toward the Sea of Reeds, an area of lakes and marshes in the region of the present-day Suez Canal. By day, a pillar of cloud goes before them, showing the way. By night, a pillar of fire illuminates their path. He is a visible, undeniable, constant guide. The people follow this supernatural presence. In the Egyptian palace, after the funeral of the firstborn son, after the sharp grief begins to morph into a simmering rage, the Pharaoh summons his advisors. Someone raises the question they are all thinking. What have we done by letting Israel go so they can't serve us? The Egyptian economy depended on that massive workforce. Construction projects are at a standstill. The fields need workers. The absence of the Hebrews is immediately felt in the empire's productive structure. The Pharaoh's wounded pride mixes with cold economic calculation. He decides to rectify what he now considers a mistake made under pressure. He orders his war chariot to be prepared. It is not a solitary expedition. He assembles 600 chosen chariots, the best in the Egyptian army, plus all the other chariots in Egypt, each with its officers. It is a massive military force designed to intimidate, surround, and forcibly return the runaway slaves. The army sets off in pursuit. The Israelites camp by the sea. It's a location that seems strategically absurd, water blocking their path ahead, desert on either side, and only one way back. Then, someone sees dust on the horizon. The dust turns into shapes. The shapes turn into chariots. The entire Egyptian army is approaching with terrifying speed. Panic erupts instantly. The people, who just days before had celebrated their liberation, now turn bitterly against Moses. Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die in the desert? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you in Egypt, leave us alone and serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. This is the first of many complaints that will arise in the desert. Known slavery, with all its miseries, seems preferable to imminent death and freedom. They are trapped. There is no visible way out. The wagons are approaching. The sea cannot be crossed. Military logic dictates that they are about to be massacred or recaptured. Moses, facing the mass panic of 2 million terrified people, utters words that defy all physical evidence. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. It is a declaration of pure faith in the face of absolute impossibility. But then God speaks to Moses with a certain urgency. Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Move on to where? To the sea. God instructs him. And you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, so that the Israelites may go through the sea on dry ground. The pillar of cloud that had been going before them moved and positioned itself between the Israelite camp and the Egyptian army. For the Israelites, it provided light. For the Egyptians, it was impenetrable darkness. All night long, the two armies were separated by this supernatural barrier. The Egyptians could not advance, confused by the darkness. The Israelites waited, still not knowing what would happen. Moses stretches out his hand over the sea. God causes a strong east wind to blow all night. It is not a gentle breeze. It is a powerful, sustained, constant gale. The waters begin to recede. The biblical description is specific. The waters were divided. A passage forms in the middle of the sea, with the waters raised, like a wall on his right and on his left. At dawn, the phenomenon is complete. A dry dirt road stretches across the exposed seabed. The Israelis, initially incredulous, begin to walk. Families with young children gaze at the walls of water on either side, held up by unseen power. The elderly advance on ground that hours before was submerged under meters of water. Flocks are led through the impossible passage. 2 million people cross over the course of several hours. When dawn breaks and the pillar of cloud lifts, the Egyptians see what is happening. Far from being deterred by the obvious miracle, Pharaoh orders a chase. Chariots enter the exposed seabed. Horses gallop along the same path the Israelites are using. Egyptian confidence is high. They have speed, they have weapons, they will catch the fugitives in open terrain. But something begins to go wrong. The chariot wheels jam, come off. Progress becomes clumsy, difficult. The drivers struggle to maintain control. Some Egyptians begin to shout, "Let's flee before Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." They have recognized too late that they are fighting not against unarmed slaves, but against the power that ravaged their nation with plagues. The last of the Israelites reach the opposite shore. They are safe on the eastern side of the sea. Then God says to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." Moses obeys. He stretches out his hand at dawn. The walls of water, held back for hours by divine power, collapse. The sea returns to its normal state with devastating force. The waters crash down upon the Egyptians on the seabed. Chariots are swept away. Horses drown. Soldiers try to swim, but the currents are irresistible. The entire army, chariots, cavalry, the whole of Pharaoh's army that had followed them into the sea, persists. The text is emphatic. Not one of them was left. It is the complete annihilation of Egyptian military power. On the opposite shore, the Israelites watch in horror and astonishment. The sea casts the corpses. Ashore, the very soldiers who hours before had pursued them now lie dead, deposited by the waves. The victory was not won with Israelite swords, but with the sea itself transformed into a divine weapon. Faced with the spectacle of power they had just witnessed, something exploded within the people. Moses sang a song, and the people sang it with him. "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled horse and rider into the sea." It is the first victory hymn recorded in the history of Israel. The women, led by Miriam, Moses' sister, take up tambourines and dance. The celebration is uninhibited, joyous, and pent-up tension is released. They have witnessed the impossible. They have crossed a divided sea. They have seen their oppressors destroyed without lifting a sword. 430 years of slavery are over. The most powerful empire in the known world lies broken behind them. But ahead lies the Sinai desert, arid, vast, with no apparent resources. And in that desert, this newly liberated people will have to learn to live not as slaves, but as a nation. The God who brought them out of Egypt will now have to teach them who they are and how to live. That process will be more difficult than crossing the sea. The sea has closed over Egypt. Freedom has been won. But now the real challenge begins, transforming 2 million former slaves into a nation with identity, laws, and purpose. And in the heart of the desert, on a sacred mountain, Moses will receive something that will define not only Israel, but all of Western civilization. 3 days after crossing the sea, the euphoria begins to evaporate under the relentless desert sun. The people reach Mara, where they finally find water. But the water is bitter, undrinkable. Complaints immediately arise. What shall we drink? Moses cries out to God, who shows him a tree. When he throws it into the water, it becomes sweet. It is the first miracle of provision in the desert, but it will not be the last. They reach the desert of sin. The provisions they brought from Egypt run out. Hunger sets in, and with hunger comes selective nostalgia. If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat around the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread. They conveniently forget the whippings, the forced labor, the drowned children. They remember only the guaranteed food of slavery. God responds with 2 supernatural provisions. Every evening, flocks of quail arrive at the camp, enough to feed everyone. Every morning, except the 7th day, when the people emerge from their tents, they find the ground covered with a sweet, flaky, white substance. What is this? They ask in Hebrew. Manhu, hence the name they give it. Manna. It is the bread from heaven that will feed them for 40 years. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the multitude reached the Sinai desert. There stood the mountain where Moses had seen the burning bush years before. The people camped in front of the mountain. Moses climbed it alone. God spoke to him from the summit. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I brought you to myself on eagle's wings. Then comes the proposed covenant. If you truly listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It is an offer of a privileged relationship, of a shared purpose, of identity as a chosen people. Moses goes down and conveys these words to the elders. The people's response is unanimous. We will do everything the Lord has said. God instructs Moses to prepare the people. For 3 days they must consecrate themselves, wash their clothes, abstain from sexual relations, and purify themselves ritually. Boundaries are established around the mountain. No one is to touch it under penalty of death. Not even animals that wander nearby can survive. God's holiness is dangerous to the unconsecrated. On the 3rd day, at dawn, thunder and lightning erupted over Mount Sinai. A thick, dark cloud enveloped the summit. The sound of an extremely loud trumpet, a shofar, resonated throughout the camp. The entire people trembled. Moses led them out of the camp to meet with God, and they stopped at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai is completely enveloped in smoke because God has descended upon it in fire. The smoke rises like the smoke from a furnace, and the entire mountain trembles violently. The sound of the shofar increases in intensity until it becomes deafening. Moses speaks, and God answers him with thunder. The biblical account suggests a theophany, a physical manifestation of the divine, so intense that the people cannot bear it. They tell Moses, you speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. They have directly experienced what it means to be in the unfiltered presence of the divine, and it is terrifying beyond human tolerance. Moses reassures them, do not be afraid, for God has come to test you, so that the fear of him may be before you, and you will not sin. Then he approaches alone into the dense darkness where God is. The people remain at a distance, watching their leader disappear into the supernatural cloud that crowns the mountain. From the fire and darkness, God utters the words that will become the fundamental moral code of Western civilization. First, he establishes his identity. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Then come the commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make an idol or any image in the form of anything you desire. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. These are 10 principles that govern the vertical relationship with God and the horizontal relationships between humans. They are not suggestions. They are categorical imperatives. They define absolute moral boundaries, and they are audible to all the people. The text suggests that these specific words were heard directly by everyone, not just by Moses. But the 10 Commandments are only the beginning. God calls Moses to go higher, to remain on the mountain. Moses leaves Aaron and Hur in charge of the people. He ascends to the summit, disappearing into the cloud that covers the mountain. Once at the top, the glory of the Lord settles upon Sinai, and the cloud covers it for 6 days. On the 7th day, God calls to Moses from within the cloud. The appearance of divine glory, as seen from below by the Israelites, is like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. Moses remains there for 40 days and 40 nights, without eating bread or drinking water. During this time, he receives detailed instructions, civil laws, ceremonial laws, designs for the tabernacle, the portable tent of meeting where the divine presence will dwell, specifications for the Ark of the Covenant, the altar, and the priestly garments. It is a complete legal code encompassing worship, justice, hygiene, agriculture, economics, and family relations. It is the constitution of a nascent nation, given not by human counsel, but by direct revelation. Finally, God gives Moses 2 stone tablets, written with God's own finger, containing the testimony of the covenant. But down in the camp, Moses' prolonged absence breeds anxiety. The people gather before Aaron. "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." 40 days feels like abandonment. Aaron, under pressure, inexplicably gives in. He asks that the gold earrings of his wives, sons, and daughters be brought to him. He melts the gold and shapes it with a chisel, giving it the form of a calf. The people proclaim, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." They build an altar before it. The next day, they offer burnt offerings and sacrifices, and the people sit down to eat and drink and rise up to play. It is an incomprehensible betrayal. Weeks after hearing the divine voice directly forbidding idols, they create exactly that. They have reduced the God who parted the sea to the image of an Egyptian animal. The irony is devastating. They free themselves from Egypt physically, but carry Egypt in their hearts. On the mountain, God informs Moses of what is happening below. His anger flares. He threatens to destroy the entire people and start a new nation with only Moses. But Moses passionately intercedes. "Why, Lord, does your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them'? Turn from your fierce anger and relent from harming your people." Moses descends, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant, written on both sides. Joshua, who was waiting for him below, hears the noise from the encampment and thinks it is the sound of war. Moses recognizes it as singing. When he gets close enough to see the calf and the dancing, his own anger explodes. He throws down the stone tablets and breaks them at the foot of the mountain. He takes the golden calf, burns it in the fire, grinds it to powder, sprinkles it on the water, and makes the Israelites drink it. He confronts Aaron. "What has this people done to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" Aaron's response is pathetic. He shirks responsibility, blames the people, and ridiculously claims that he threw the gold into the fire, and out came this calf. Moses stood at the gate of the camp and shouted, "Who is for the Lord? Let them come to me." The sons of Levi gathered around him. He ordered them to execute judgment. They cut through the camp with swords, killing approximately 3,000 men that day, the main instigators of idolatry. It was a brutal purge, but, from the perspective of the text, necessary to preserve the identity of the people. The next day, Moses says to the people, "You have committed a great sin. Now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." He goes up again. He offers his own life as a substitute. "If you forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of your book that you have written." It is radical intercession, the leader offering himself for the guilty people. God rejects substitution but offers mercy mixed with justice. He will not destroy the people, but he will punish them for their sin. He commands them to continue toward the promised land, but warns that his full presence will not go with them, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. The people lament upon hearing these words. Moses negotiates. He begs to see the glory of God. Moses bargains. He begs to see God's glory. The answer is partial but astonishing. "I will cause all my goodness to pass before you, but you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." God places Moses in a cleft of rock, covers him with his hand as his glory passes by, and then withdraws his hand so that Moses can see his back. It is an intimate encounter with the divine, but mediated, protected, because the full glory would consume the human. God commands Moses to carve 2 new stone tablets. He will ascend Mount Sinai again, and God will rewrite the words that were on the first tablets that Moses broke. It is an act of renewing the covenant, a second chance despite the betrayal. Moses carves the tablets, ascends alone at dawn, and remains there for another 40 days and 40 nights. When he finally descends with the new tablets of the testimony, his face shines. He has been in God's presence so long that his skin radiates light. Aaron and the people are afraid to approach him. Moses must cover his face with a veil when he speaks to them, removing it only when he goes in to speak with God. It is a visible sign that he has been where no other human can go. The covenant is renewed, the laws are written, but the people have proven their inability to remain faithful even weeks after witnessing miracles. Can this rebellious nation survive the journey through the desert to the promised land? And Moses, who has seen more of God than any human, will he be able to lead them to the end? Following the instructions received at Sinai, the people built the tabernacle. It was an elaborate portable structure. Curtains of fine linen embroidered with cherubim, acacia wood overlaid with gold, a bronze altar for sacrifices, and an Ark of the Covenant where the tablets of the law were placed. When everything was finished according to God's design, the cloud that had guided them descended and covered the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord filled it so completely that not even Moses could enter. From that moment on, the cloud over the tabernacle became Israel's navigational system. When the cloud lifted, the people broke camp and marched. Wherever the cloud stopped, there they camped. Sometimes they remained in one place for days, sometimes for months. It was a nomadic existence completely dependent on visible, supernatural guidance. God literally dwelt in the midst of his people. From Mount Sinai, they traveled to the desert of Paran. They are near the border of Canaan, the promised land. God commands Moses to send spies to explore the land, one leader from each of the 12 tribes. For 40 days, these men travel throughout Canaan. They return carrying a bunch of grapes so large that it must be carried by 2 men on a pole, along with pomegranates and figs. The report is mixed. They confirm that the land flows with milk and honey, just as God promised. But 10 of the 12 spies add a terrifying warning. The people who live in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there, legendary giants. They conclude, "We will not be able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we are." Only 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, dissent. Caleb confidently declares, "We must go up and take possession of it, for we will certainly conquer it." But the other 10 spread a bad report that terrifies the people. They describe the inhabitants as giants before whom the Israelites seemed like grasshoppers. Military logic suggests that this is suicide. The entire congregation raises its voice and weeps all that night. They complain against Moses and Aaron. "If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt?" They even conspire to choose a captain and return. Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes in despair, pleading with the people to trust in God. But the congregation speaks of stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appears in the tabernacle before all the Israelites. God, furious at their repeated unbelief, again threatens to destroy the people with pestilence. Once more Moses intercedes. God spares them from immediate destruction, but pronounces a devastating judgment. None of the men 20 years of age and older who came out of Egypt and witnessed his miracles but rebelled will enter the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb, the 2 faithful spies, will see Canaan. The rest will wander in the desert for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies explored the land, until that entire generation dies in the desert. Their children, whom they said would be prey, will be the ones to enter. It is an unappealable sentence. The generation of liberation will not be the generation of possession. A strange existence begins, an entire people wandering in circles in and around the Sinai desert. They do not advance toward Canaan because God does not lead them there. They simply wait for time to pass, for the doomed generation to die. During these years, the complaints, the rebellions, the judgments continue. Korah, a Levite, leads a rebellion against the authority of Moses and Aaron, questioning why they exalt themselves above the congregation. The earth literally opens up and swallows Korah and his followers alive, along with their families and possessions. The fire of the Lord consumes 250 men who offered incense in the rebellion. When the people complained again about the lack of water, God instructed Moses to speak to a rock so that water would flow. But Moses, frustrated by decades of endless complaints, struck the rock twice with his staff instead of speaking to it. Water gushed forth, but God told Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me to treat me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this assembly into the land I have given them." It is a bitter sentence. The liberator himself will not enter the promised land. For an act of disobedience in a moment of desperation, Moses will pay the ultimate price, to see the land but not to set foot on it. Aaron, Moses' brother and spokesman, dies on Mount Hor at the age of 123. The entire house of Israel mourns him for 30 days. This is the first of the personal losses Moses will face toward the end of his life. Eleazar, Aaron's son, assumes the priesthood. Miriam, the sister who watched over the basket on the Nile decades earlier, also dies and is buried in Kadesh. The three siblings who led the Exodus are nearing the end of their lives. Moses, now over 100 years old, continues to lead, but he knows his time is running out. Finally, after 40 years, the new generation is ready. The children of those who left Egypt are now adults. They don't know slavery directly, only the stories. They have grown up with manna, with the tabernacle in the middle of the camp, with the cloud guiding them. They are raised in the desert, hardened, prepared. Before entering Canaan, they faced military opposition. The Amorites, under King Sihon, refused to let them pass peacefully and went to battle. Israel utterly defeated them, capturing their cities. Og, king of Bashan, a legendary giant, also waged war against them. Israel defeated him, conquering his kingdom. These were Israel's first real military victories, demonstrating that the new generation could fight. They camp on the plains of Moab, across the Jordan River from Jericho. They are on the threshold of the Promised Land. Moses knows his personal mission is drawing to a close. He gathers the people in a series of lengthy speeches that will be preserved as the book of Deuteronomy. He repeats the law, recounts history, warns them against the temptation of idolatry, and exhorts them to faithfulness. "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil," he tells them. "Choose life, so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast to him." It is an existential ultimatum. Obedience brings blessing, disobedience brings curse. He prophesies their future. They will enter, they will conquer, but eventually they will become corrupt and be exiled. But he also promises future restoration. God commands Moses to summon Joshua and present themselves together at the tabernacle. There, in the presence of the pillar of cloud, God officially commissions Joshua as the new leader. "Be strong and courageous, for you will bring the Israelites into the land I swore to give them on oath, and I will be with you." It is a formal transfer of authority from one generation to the next, from liberator to conqueror. Moses wrote the entire law in a book and gave it to the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant. He instructed that every 7 years, during the Feast of Tabernacles, the law should be read aloud publicly before all Israel, men, women, children, and foreigners. Its memory was to be preserved, passed on, and constantly renewed. He then composes a prophetic song, a long poem that summarizes the history of Israel and warns against their tendency toward rebellion. He teaches this song to the people so they will memorize it. It will serve as a testimony against them when they stumble, a reminder that they were warned. God tells Moses, "Go up to this mountain Abarim, to Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab opposite Jericho, and see the land of Canaan that I am giving to the children of Israel as a possession. There on the mountain to which you go up, you will die." Moses ascends alone. From the summit of Mount Nebo, God shows him the entire panorama: Gilead as far north as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, and the Jordan Valley. It is a complete view of the land that God swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have allowed you to see it with your own eyes, God tells him, but you will not pass through. It is a bittersweet moment, the fulfillment of an ancient promise that Moses can see but not experience. He has led the people for 40 years through impossibilities, seen miracles that no other human has witnessed, spoken with God face to face. And yet, for one act of disobedience, he will pay the price of not completing the journey. The biblical text simply records, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord." Some traditional commentators suggest that it was a unique kind of death, a divine kiss, without agony or illness. God himself buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, but no one knows the location of his grave to this day. He was 120 years old when he died. But the text adds an extraordinary detail. His eyes were not dim, nor was his vigor abated. He did not die of old age or weakness. He died simply because his mission was complete and the judgment pronounced had to be fulfilled. The Israelites mourned him for 30 days on the plains of Moab. Joshua, filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him, assumed leadership. The people obeyed him, doing what the Lord had commanded Moses. The book of Deuteronomy concludes with a unique epitaph. There has never again arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, concerning all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh, to all his servants, and to all his land, and concerning the mighty hand and all the great and awesome deeds that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. The story of Moses does not end with his death on Mount Nebo. His legacy extends across millennia. The laws he received at Sinai became the moral constitution not only of Israel, but of Western civilization. The Ten Commandments were enshrined in the legal codes of nations throughout history. The concept of a single, universal, moral God who demands justice and mercy transformed human religion. Judaism venerates him as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, the supreme prophet whose closeness to God was unmatched. Christianity sees him as the forerunner of Christ, the one who announced the coming of a greater prophet. Islam honors him as Musa, one of the most important prophets, mentioned more frequently in the Quran than any other figure. Beyond the religious aspect, Moses represents universal human archetypes, the liberator who sacrifices personal comfort for collective justice, the leader who intercedes for his rebellious people even when they reject him, the visionary who guides them toward promises he will not live to see fulfilled. His life is a narrative of liberation, law, leadership, and intercession. From the Egyptian palace to the burning bush, from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, from 40 years of lamenting in the desert to the solitary view from Mount Nebo, Moses walked an impossible path. He transformed slaves into a nation, delivered divine revelation to humanity, and established a moral framework that, 3,000 years later, continues to influence how societies understand justice, human dignity, and ethical responsibility. The boy who should have drowned in the Nile became the man who parted the sea. The fugitive who herded other people's sheep became the shepherd of millions. The stutterer who refused to speak became the voice that pronounced eternal laws. And the liberator who never entered the promised land became the bridge that allowed future generations to find not only a physical territory, but an identity, a purpose, and a God who hears the cry of the oppressed. His tomb remains hidden. Perhaps fittingly, his monument is not made of stone but of words, laws, collective memory, and 3 religions that claim him as their founder. The man died alone on a mountain. But the prophet lives on in every text that invokes justice, in every legal code that protects the vulnerable, in every voice that cries out for freedom. Moses, the most important prophet in Judaism, ended his journey gazing at the promise from afar. But in that act of seeing without possessing, of leading without any visible end reward, of obeying even when the cost was personal, he left a legacy more lasting than any conquest. He taught that some victories are not meant to be enjoyed by those who make them possible, and that true leadership is measured not by what one gains, but by what one gives so that others may inherit it. The desert swallowed him up. but history immortalized him. And in every generation that fights for freedom, that seeks a moral code, that yearns for an encounter with the divine, the echo of that man who spoke with God face to face continues to resonate.